Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. They expected an army. But a lone human ship changed everything. Alert status upgraded to Crimson. All battle stations manned and ready. Shield generators at 100% capacity. All 7,000 plasma cannons charged and tracking. Missile silos armed and awaiting target acquisition. The entirety of the Vexor defensive fleet has assembled in Thean formation, First Commander Rostek reported, his voice betraying not a hint of the terror that had gripped the command center for the past 3 solar cycles. Supreme Admiral Kondar clicked his mandibles together in agitation, 86 eyes blinking in rapid sequence as he gazed at the massive display showing the combined might of the Vexor Confederation. 3,000 warships, each one bristling with enough firepower to glass a small moon, ranged in a defensive formation so expansive it could be seen from the surface of Vexor Prime with the naked eye. And the evacuation of the civilian population? Kondar asked, though he already knew the answer. No evacuation plan could possibly move 8 billion citizens in time. They had prepared as best they could. Proceeding according to schedule, Supreme Admiral. Approximately 23% of priority citizens have reached the designated shelter zones. The response came from Strategic Minister Lokvina, her normally vibrant blue scales now a pale, sickly cyan from stress. 23%. Barely a quarter. Might as well be zero, Science Director Pax Toral muttered, not quite under his breath. His fourth arm tapped nervously on the console before him, bringing up projection after projection of casualty estimates. The humans will be through our defenses in under 6 hours if the intelligence reports are accurate. No amount of sheltering will. That's quite enough, Director, Kondar cut him off sharply. We've all reviewed the intelligence. We've all seen the projections. But the Vexor Confederation has stood for 12,000 years. We will not cower before these primates. The assembled command staff shifted uncomfortably. None dared contradict the Supreme Admiral openly, but they had all seen the reports from the outer colonies, the devastation, the speed with which human forces overwhelmed planetary defenses, the strange, unpredictable tactics that defied all standard military doctrine. Long-range sensors detecting warp field formation at the edge of the system, announced Sensor Officer M.K. Tuva, her voice cracking slightly. Multiple signatures, large vessels. Definitely not Kron, definitely not Relian. Energy patterns consistent with human drive systems. The command center fell into absolute silence. The moment they had dreaded for nearly a standard year had arrived. Kondar straightened his posture, all 4 arms clasped behind his back in the traditional stance of a Vexari commander facing certain doom. On screen. Maximum magnification. The main display shifted, zooming toward the outer reaches of the Vexor home system. Every officer in the command center held their breath, expecting to see a vast armada of human warships appearing from warp space. That can't be right. Mika's fingers flew across her console, recalibrating sensors, running diagnostics. What is it, officer? Report. Kondar demanded. Supreme Admiral, sensors are functioning correctly, but there's only one ship. One. The word exploded from Kondar's mouth, all 6 eyes widening in disbelief. Impossible. Intelligence reported the humans were amassing their entire 3rd fleet for this assault. The display zoomed further, revealing a single vessel hanging in space. It was undeniably of human design, all sleek curves and asymmetrical geometry that offended Vexari aesthetic sensibilities. But it was just one ship, no escorts, no support vessels, no fighters. Nothing. Perhaps it's a scout, suggested First Commander Rostek, the vanguard of their main force. Or a trap, Strategic Minister Lokvina's scales shifted to a thoughtful purple. Some kind of new human deception. Maybe they sent the wrong coordinates to their fleet, Strategic Advisor Beck Mull said with a nervous laugh that no one joined. Can you imagine? Sorry, Supreme Commander, we meant to invade Vagra Prime, but we accidentally input the coordinates for the Andromeda Galaxy instead. No one found it amusing. They're hailing us, MK Tuva reported, incredulity evident in her voice. Condor's mandibles clicked rapidly in succession, a Vixar expression of extreme confusion. 3,000 warships, 7,000 orbital defense platforms, the most sophisticated planetary shield system in the known galaxy, and nearly 2 million soldiers had been mobilized for one human vessel. Put it through, he ordered after a moment of stunned silence. And keep all weapons locked on target. If this is some kind of trick. But deep in his primary heart, Condor knew no deception could explain this. The humans had arrived at Vixar Prime exactly as predicted, but with a single ship instead of an armada. And somehow, that was far more terrifying than facing 1,000 human dreadnoughts. The Vexar Confederation had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 12 millennia with little resistance. Their technological superiority, combined with their natural tactical abilities, a product of evolving on a world with 17 apex predator species, had made them the undisputed masters of nearly 800 star systems. Until the humans appeared. Remind me again, Condor said, his voice unnaturally calm as they waited for the communication channel to open. When exactly did we first learn of these creatures? Strategic Minister Locke Vina activated her data pad, though she hardly needed to check. Every Vixari official knew this history by heart now. Precisely 2 standard years ago, Supreme Admiral. The Kron Empire attempted to expand into what they believed was unclaimed space in the Orion Spur. They encountered human colony worlds and, following standard Kron protocol, demanded immediate surrender and integration. And Condor prompted, though he knew what came next. And 6 weeks later, the Kron Empire ceased to exist. Science Director Pax Toral let out a barking laugh. 6 weeks. An empire that stood for 4,000 years eradicated in 6 weeks by a species most of the galaxy didn't even know existed. What kind of monsters can do that? The command center fell silent again. The Kron had been brutal, expansionist, and ruthlessly efficient. And they had been utterly destroyed by humanity's response to their aggression. The Rillian Compact was next, correct? Condor asked, still staring at the image of the lone human ship on the display. Yes, Supreme Admiral, Locke Vanina continued. The Rillian attempted to form an alliance with the humans against the remaining Kron holdouts. They interpreted humanity's defense of their colonies as an indication of similar expansionist goals. The Rillian, Beckma muttered. Always thinking everyone thinks like them. Idiots. The humans agreed to the alliance, Locke Vina went on. They helped the Rillian eliminate the Kron remnants, and then, when the Regal suggested they jointly claim the former Kron territories, the humans turned on them too, Condor finished. But why? The Regans offered them half of everything. That's the thing no one understands about humans, Pax Tal interjected, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. They don't operate according to any recognized model of imperial expansion. They don't seek territory beyond what they claim as their original borders. They don't demand tribute or resources. They just react violently, disproportionately. MK Tua spoke up from her sensor station. My sister's mate was a xenoanthropologist before we prepared for war. She theorized that humans evolved in an environment so hazardous that their primary evolutionary advantage became the ability to respond to threats with overwhelming force. They don't have natural weapons. They don't have particularly durable bodies. All they have is this instinct to escalate beyond all rational limits. And now they're here. One ship. Condor's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement if not for the gravity of the situation. After we blocked their mining outpost in the Tacti system. After we seized those 3 human merchant vessels for inspection. After we declared their ambassador persona non grata and expelled their diplomatic mission. We were following the protocols established by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Locke Vina protested. Standard procedure for establishing dominance in preliminary negotiations with a new species. Standard procedure, Kondar repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. We treated humans like we've treated every other race we've encountered. And now they've come to annihilate us with one ship. The communication officer's console chimed. Supreme Admiral, the human vessel is broadcasting on all frequencies. Should I? Yes, yes. Put it through. Kondar straightened his uniform and faced the main screen. Let's see what doom looks like. The main view screen flickered, and the command center collectively held its breath. For heart-stopping seconds passed before an image resolved, a human. A human. Kondar had seen images of humans before, of course. The intelligence briefings had been thorough. But seeing one live, staring directly at him, was entirely different. The creature had disturbingly few eyes, just two, and completely lacked proper exoskeletal protection. Its skin looked soft, vulnerable, practically begging to be pierced by any decent predator. Yet there was something in those two eyes that made Kondar's primary heart skip a beat. Greetings, representatives of the Vexor Confederation. I am Captain Marcus Chen of the Earth diplomatic vessel, Reconciliation. We come in peace and request permission to establish direct communications. The human spoke perfect Vexor standard without even a trace of an accent. More disturbing still, the human's face remained almost completely motionless as it spoke, a stark contrast to the constant mandible clicking, eye blinking, and scale color shifting that characterized proper Vexor communication. By the ancestral void, whispered Beck Maul. It's like talking to a statue. Kondar composed himself, drawing on 12 decades of military discipline. This is Supreme Admiral Kondar of the Vexari Confederation Defense Force. State your purpose for entering restricted Vexari space with a military vessel. The human, this Marcus Chen, tilted its head slightly. The Reconciliation is not a military vessel, Supreme Admiral. We are a diplomatic ship, as our designation indicates. We have come to discuss the recent misunderstandings between our peoples. Misunderstandings? First Commander Raz Tech couldn't contain himself. You call the seizure of your mining outpost a misunderstanding? You're not here for revenge. A peculiar expression crossed the human's face, a slight upward curve of its mouth parts that intelligence reports identified as a smile. Supposedly, it could indicate pleasure, amusement, or imminent aggression, depending on context. Commander, if we were here for revenge, we wouldn't have sent a diplomatic vessel. And we certainly wouldn't have announced our arrival. The human's voice remained unervingly calm. May I request permission to dock with your station? My team and I would prefer to continue this conversation in person. Absolutely not. Science Director Pax Toral burst out. Supreme Admiral, we cannot allow humans aboard our command station. The security risks are. Your concerns are noted, Director. Kondar cut him off with a sharp mandible click. He addressed the human directly. Captain Chen, you must understand our caution. Your species has demonstrated considerable military capability in recent conflicts. Your arrival in our system with only a single vessel is puzzling. The human's smile widened slightly. I understand completely, Supreme Admiral. In your position, I'd be equally cautious. Perhaps a compromise? We could meet on neutral ground. The Reconciliation carries a detachable conference module specifically designed for such situations. We could deploy it midway between your station and our ship. Both delegations would use separate shuttles to reach it. Kondar exchanged glances with his command staff. The proposal was reasonable. Suspiciously so. Everything they knew about humans suggested they should be facing orbital bombardment right now, not polite diplomatic overtures. A moment, Captain Shen, Kondar said, muting the transmission. It's a trap, Lok Ven stated flatly, her scales pulsing in anxious yellow. They'll detonate some kind of weapon when we enter their module. If they wanted to destroy us, they could have launched an attack without warning, Rose countered. Why bother with this charade? To get close to our command structure, Pax TL suggested. To capture our leadership. Kandar silenced them with a raised hand. We have 3,000 warships surrounding one diplomatic vessel. If this is some kind of human deception, they've placed themselves at an extraordinary disadvantage. He unmuted the transmission. Captain Chen, we accept your proposal. Deploy your conference module. My delegation will meet yours in 2 hours. Excellent, the human replied. We look forward to resolving our differences peacefully, Supreme Admiral. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Well, said Beck Maul with a nervous laugh, either we're about to make history with the first successful peace negotiation with humans, or we're about to be spectacularly killed. Anyone want to place bets? No one did. The conference module hung in space exactly halfway between the massive Vexor command station and the comparatively tiny human vessel. It was a sleek cylindrical structure with a transparent dome on top, through which the stars were clearly visible. Despite their intelligence briefings suggesting humans preferred dim, cave-like environments, the module was brightly lit and spacious. Kandar's shuttle docked precisely on schedule. He had selected his delegation carefully, First Commander Rustek for military expertise, Strategic Minister Locke Vina for political insight, and Science Director Pax Terrell for technical analysis. Beck Maul had been left behind to coordinate the fleet, much to his vocal disappointment. Remember, Kandar instructed as they prepared to enter the module, no sudden movements. Humans reportedly interpret rapid motion as threatening. And maintain at least 2 arm lengths distance. They have strange notions about personal space. And their unpredictable emotional responses? Locke Vina asked, her scales shifting nervously between green and blue. Unavoidable, Kandar replied grimly. Just try not to trigger what they call anger. That's when they're most dangerous. The airlock cycled open, and the Vixari delegation entered the conference module. The human delegation was already present, standing on the opposite side of a large circular table. There were 4 of them, 4 unarmored humans against the might of the Vegari Confederation. Captain Marcus Chen stood at the center, immediately recognizable from the transmission. To his right was a shorter human with darker skin and curly black head fur, introduced as Dr. Amara Okafor, xenoanthropologist. To Chen's left stood a tall, pale human with no head fur at all, identified as Commander Jackson Reed, tactical officer. The 4th human, a medium-height female with striking red head fur, was presented as Lieutenant Nora Sullivan, diplomatic liaison. No guards. No visible weapons. Not even the ceremonial daggers that were standard in most galactic diplomatic protocols. Supreme Admiral Kandar, Captain Chen said, performing a slight bow. Thank you for meeting with us. Please be seated. We've adjusted the chairs to accommodate Vixari physiology. Indeed, the chairs on the Vixari side had been modified with openings for their lower limbs and support structures for their exoskeletons, a surprisingly thoughtful touch. As they sat, Kandar noticed something odd about the humans. They were smiling, all of them, not the tight, predatory smiles from the intelligence briefings that signaled aggression, but open, relaxed facial expressions. Before we begin formal discussions, Captain Chen said, I want to address what I suspect is your primary concern. You're wondering why we've come with just 1 ship rather than a fleet. The question had crossed our minds, Kandar admitted, his mandibles clicking in what humans might interpret as sarcasm. The human named Reed, the tactical officer, actually laughed, a short, barking sound that made Pax Toral flinch visibly. Sorry, Reed said, noticing the reaction. It's just. Well, from our perspective, bringing a fleet would have been seen as an act of aggression. We want to resolve this peacefully. 1 ship was the appropriate response. Dr. Okafor nodded enthusiastically. We've been studying your cultural protocols, Admiral. We understand that in Vixari tradition, a show of overwhelming force is considered the proper prelude to negotiations. But humans can consider that counterproductive. Counterproductive? Kandar repeated, all 6 eyes blinking in sequence, a vexor expression of extreme doubt. Your species eliminated the Kron Empire in 6 weeks. You dismantled the Rylan Compact in less than a month. And you're telling me humans prefer peaceful resolutions? The red-furred human, Sullivan, leaned forward slightly. Her voice was softer than the others, almost musical in quality. Admiral, those were responses to direct threats against our existence. We never fired the first shot in either conflict. We didn't want those wars. We certainly don't want one with the Vixari. For perhaps the first time in his long military career, Supreme Admiral Kandar found himself completely at a loss for words. Perhaps, Captain Chen suggested, we should address the specific incidents that have brought us to this point. The mining outpost in Takti, the detained merchant vessels, the diplomatic expulsion. We view these as misunderstandings rather than deliberate provocations. Lokvina's scales flashed an incredulous orange. Misunderstandings. They were calculated measures to establish proper hierarchical relations. Standard diplomatic protocol. Dr. Okafor nodded thoughtfully. Yes, we've studied your protocols. Fascinating cultural evolution, really. The Vixari developed in an environment where establishing dominance quickly prevented resource-costly conflicts. It's logical from your evolutionary perspective. You're saying humans don't establish dominance hierarchies? Pax Toril asked skeptically. Reed snorted. Oh, we definitely do. But not quite so directly. Then how do you determine which species or faction hold superior position in negotiations? Rostek demanded, military precision in every syllable. The humans exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them, another disconcerting human trait. We don't, Sullivan finally answered. At least, not as a starting position. We prefer to establish equality first, then let natural leadership emerge through demonstrated capability. Kandar leaned forward. That is wildly inefficient. Perhaps, Chen conceded with another of those unsettling smiles. But it avoids unnecessary conflicts. Like the ones with the Kron and Relian. You conquered them. Kandar countered. Something changed in the human's demeanor. The smiles faded. Their postures straightened almost imperceptibly. Even with his limited understanding of human expressions, Kandar recognized the shift. Those were different circumstances, Reed stated flatly. The Kron attacked 3 civilian colony worlds without warning. 7 million dead in the first assault. And the Regals? Pax Toril pressed. They were your allies. Sullivan's voice remained calm but had lost its musical quality. The Relian used our alliance to access our defense networks. They attempted to insert backdoor protocols into our systems. We discovered they planned to remotely disable our planetary shields once the Kron conflict ended. Would you like to know what happened next? Reed asked, his tone casual in a way that sent danger signals through Kandar's nervous system. I believe we've reviewed the intelligence reports, Kandar replied cautiously. Have you? Interesting. Reed's fingers tapped a quick pattern on the table. Because what actually happened isn't in any report I've seen circulating. The Relian thought they'd successfully infiltrated our defense systems. They launched what they believed would be a surprise attack on 15 of our worlds simultaneously. But we knew, Chen continued evenly. We'd fed them false information. Their entire attack fleet emerged from warp space directly into our waiting ambush. We could have annihilated them completely, Sullivan added quietly. Instead, we disabled their weapons and drive systems and offered terms, which they refused, Reed finished. They chose extinction over surrender. That wasn't our choice. It was theirs. A heavy silence fell over the conference room. The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't just defeated two major galactic powers, they had outmaneuvered them completely. I begin to understand, Kandar said slowly, his mandibles barely moving. Your species' true advantage isn't military might. It's adaptability. Chen nodded. Precisely, Admiral. Throughout our evolution, humans had to survive by outsmarting predators far stronger than ourselves. We're not the fastest, strongest, or most numerous species. We had to become the most resourceful. And the most unpredictable. Our greatest evolutionary advantage, Okafor added with unexpected cheerfulness, was our ability to change strategies rapidly. What worked against us once rarely works twice. Which is why, Chen continued, we didn't respond to your blockade with military force, or to the seizure of our merchants, or even to the expulsion of our diplomats. Those were all expected responses based on your cultural protocols. Responding predictably would have escalated the situation unnecessarily. So instead, you arrived with one ship, Kandar said, understanding dawning like the light of Vexor's 3 suns. Because it was the last thing you would expect. All 4 humans smiled simultaneously, and Kandar finally recognized the expression for what it was, not a threat display, but a signal of approval. Now you're beginning to think like a human, Admiral, Chen said. Somehow, Kandar wasn't sure if that was a compliment or the most terrifying statement he'd ever heard. So where does this leave us? Kandar asked, regaining some of his composure. You've demonstrated that your species is dangerous in ways we hadn't anticipated. Are we supposed to simply surrender our interests in disputed territories? Release your merchants? Restore your mining rights? Captain Chen exchanged glances with his team before responding. Actually, Admiral, we have a different proposal in mind. One that I believe will satisfy both our peoples while avoiding unnecessary conflict. We're listening, Kandar said, though his tone suggested deep skepticism. Chen nodded to Sullivan, who activated a holographic display in the center of the table. A 3-dimensional star map appeared, highlighting the territories in dispute between humans and the Vexor Confederation. Instead of traditional territorial negotiations, we propose a challenge, Chen said, his voice taking on an almost playful quality that Kandar found deeply unsettling. A challenge? Lokvina repeated, her scales shifting to a confused purple hue. Yes, Chen confirmed. Rather than deciding these matters through military confrontation or even standard diplomatic channels, we suggest a direct competition between our species. Paxtel's nervous tapping increased in tempo. What kind of competition? Combat? Commander Reed laughed. Nothing so primitive. We propose a series of problem-solving scenarios. 3 challenges, to be precise, each designed to test different capabilities: strategic thinking, resource management, adaptive response. Your best minds against ours. The stakes would be clearly defined, Sullivan added. Each challenge corresponds to a specific disputed territory or issue. The winner of each challenge claims that particular prize. This is absurd. Riztek burst out. Interstellar relations aren't determined by games. Dr. Okafor smiled warmly. Actually, Commander, throughout human history, many conflicts were resolved through representative contests rather than full-scale war. It's a deeply ingrained cultural tradition for us, champions fighting on behalf of armies, sports competitions replacing border skirmishes, chess matches between superpowers. Chess? Kandar asked. A strategy game, Chen explained. Not unlike your own Vixari game of Talcares, though with different mechanics. The point is, this approach has precedent in both our cultures. The Vexor delegation collectively shifted in their seats. Kandar knew what they were thinking, the same thing he was. This proposal was completely outside standard protocols, yet strangely aligned with ancient Vexor traditions from before their space age. And if we refuse this challenge? Kandar asked carefully. Captain Chen's expression remained pleasant, but something flickered in his eyes. Then we returned to standard diplomatic channels. Formal protests, trade restrictions, gradually escalating responses, the usual path that eventually leads to military confrontation. A path neither of us wants to travel. The implied threat hung in the air, made all the more potent by its gentle delivery. What would these challenges entail, specifically? Lokvina asked, her scales now a calculating green. Sullivan manipulated the holographic display, bringing up 3 distinct images. First, a strategic simulation using a neutral AI system. Second, a resource allocation challenge on an uninhabited planet. Third, a real-time crisis response scenario. And you believe your single ship, with its handful of crew, can outperform the best minds of the Vexor Confederation? Pax Toril asked incredulously. All 4 humans smiled those unsettling smiles again. We wouldn't have proposed it if we weren't confident, Reed said simply. Kondar suddenly understood the true implication. The humans weren't just proposing a novel diplomatic solution, they were inviting the Vexor into a trap of their own making. These challenges would reveal Vexor thinking patterns, strategic approaches, technological capabilities, all while demonstrating human methods in controlled circumstances. It was brilliant, terrifying, and completely unexpected. We need to consult with the High Council, Kondar said finally. Of course, Chen replied. Take all the time you need. We'll be here. Just our one ship. The reminder of the humans' numerical disadvantage somehow made their confidence all the more disturbing. The return journey to the Vixari command station was conducted in uncomfortable silence, each member of the delegation lost in their own thoughts, processing the implications of the human proposal. We should refuse, Rosk finally said as their shuttle approached the docking bay. Mobilize the fleet. Strike first. It's just one ship. Is it, though? Pax Toril murmured, almost to himself. Is it really just one ship? Kondar turned all 6 eyes toward the science director. Explain. Think about it, Pax TL continued. Everything we know about humans suggests they're methodical, thorough. They don't take unnecessary risks. So why send just one ship unless? Unless one ship is all they need, Lokvina finished, her scales paling to an ashen gray. The realization hit Kondar like a plasma blast. The reconciliation isn't just a diplomatic vessel. No, Pax TL agreed. I wager it contains everything they need to execute their strategy. Regardless of our response. Accept their challenge. The ship carries their champions and equipment. Reject and attack. The ship has defensive capabilities we haven't detected. Stall for time. The ship probably contains long-term sustainability systems. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud, but no one moved to disembark. They sent exactly what they needed, Kondar said slowly. No more, no less. Perfect efficiency. Beck-Maul was waiting for them when they finally exited the shuttle. Well? What did the humans want? Are we at war? Kondar clicked his mandibles in what, for a Vexor, was unmistakable laughter. No. At least, not yet. They've proposed a series of challenges instead of military conflict. Challenges? Beck-Maul looked bewildered. Like games. Like tests, Kondar corrected. Tests that will reveal as much about us as we learn about them. And you're considering this? Beckma asked incredulously. Kondar gazed out the viewport at the distant speck that was the human vessel, tiny against the backdrop of 3,000 Vixari warships. One ship that had changed everything. Yes, he said finally. Because today I learned something about humans that no intelligence report could convey. They didn't send a fleet because they didn't need to. One ship was sufficient to deliver their message, present their proposal, and, I suspect, execute whatever plan they've devised regardless of our response. They're terrifying, Lokvina whispered. Yes, Kondar agreed. But also fascinating. And if we're wise, perhaps they'll be valuable allies someday, rather than enemies. The Supreme Admiral turned away from the viewport, his decision made. Inform the High Council, we accept the human challenge.